go find some skipping stones.
Oh yeah.
No stones, but look, here's some driftwood.
Aw, not these guys. It's hard to believe that something this small, an invasive species from the other side of the world, could upset the largest freshwater ecosystem in the world.
What's even harder to believe is another invasive species, a prehistoric throwback that's been around for 340 million years.
With over 100 hook teeth and a thirst for blood.
Is out there swimming in all 5 of the Great Lakes.
So join us as we dive deeper into revealing this predator in paradise. The waters here are so vast. Some call the Great Lakes a freshwater sea.
It makes you wonder, how did these lakes form?
Over the past 2.5 million years, the glaciers, the ice sheets coming and going, created an extensive chain of lakes in North America. If you zoom out on a map of North America, you can see the Great Lakes and the unique shape that they are.
The Great Lakes are really unique, not only to North America, but to the world. They hold 21% of the world's freshwater. But in addition, they support a thriving fishery. Communities rely on them for tourism. People come from all over the world to visit the Great Lakes, to fish the Great Lakes, to go boating, recreate, and just enjoy their beauty and the massive splendor that they offer. The Great Lakes ecosystem took about 10,000 years to evolve. However, in just a relatively short amount of time, human impacts changed the ecosystem forever.
It was the perfect storm. We created the vector pathways and opened up the waterways for an ancient predator.
There are actually 40 known species of lampreys in the world. There may be more that we don't know about, and many of these species are not very well researched. But we know in the Great Lakes, there are 5 lamprey species. 4 of them are native lamprey species, so that means that they have been here since the beginning and they don't do harm to the ecosystem. They're actually a natural part of the system. Sea lampreys in the Great Lakes are the only lamprey species that have become established outside of their range in a predatory capacity. Sea lampreys in the Great Lakes are not only parasites, meaning they feed on their host, they're also predators in that they kill the majority of the fish that they prey on. In fact, we estimate that only 1 in 7 fish that are attacked by a sea lamprey in the Great Lakes will survive, either because they succumb to that predation or because they're swimming around with a giant wound in their side, and that makes them susceptible to infection.
Many saltwater species would be unable to enter the Great Lakes, let alone take over, because their gills and their salt balance systems in their body are really adapted to saltwater. Sea lamprey were uniquely positioned to invade fresh water because they already spend part of their life in fresh water. Therefore, when they got landlocked within the Great Lakes, they were still able to feed and kill fish in that parasitic stage.
What makes the sea lamprey such a successful predator in the Great Lakes, typically a parasitic in the ocean? It's a great explorer, finds a lot of streams and a lot of ways to make its way through the lakes, hitchhiking on fish, hitchhiking on boats, rapidly colonizes new streams by being able to sense whether other lampreys have been able to successfully reproduce there. And then they're very prolific. A female can hold 80,000, 100,000 eggs, so it does not take very many lampreys in one stream to create a real problem in just that stream. And there's about 500 streams around the Great Lakes that are colonized by sea lamprey.
Of the more than 180 species that invaded the Great Lakes on the coattails of human progress, what made this one so devastating?
When you decimate any part of an ecosystem, the effects ripple through the rest of the ecosystem, and sometimes beyond.
When people think about the word invasive species, a lot of things probably come to mind, but some things that may escape their imagination is the destruction invasive species cause. And there's a really clear example of that in the Great Lakes, where we have invasive sea lamprey that cause destruction at the ecosystem level and at the economic level, where you have fisheries and ecosystems valued at billions of dollars that are threatened by this one particular invasive species.
Sea lampreys are native to the Atlantic Ocean. They entered Lake Ontario in the late 1800s when a man-made breach allowed access from a nearby tributary of the Atlantic Ocean. For more than half a century, Niagara Falls served as a natural barrier, confining sea lampreys to Lake Ontario. However, after the Welland Canal, which allows ships to bypass the falls, was widened and deepened in 1919, sea lampreys entered Lake Erie, where they were first observed in 1921.
By 1938, they were in all of the lakes, and by the mid-1940s to the 1950s, they really started their devastation of Great Lakes fisheries as we understand it. It wasn't until the commercial fishermen really started pulling in fish that had a lot of sea lamprey wounds on them, reported sighting a lot of sea lampreys and actually a lot of reduced catch in the fishery. That was really the aha moment when people really understood what the sea lamprey was and what it could do into the future if it wasn't controlled. We have records of sea lamprey damage on pretty much every fish species in the Great Lakes. Things that you think might turn the tables on a sea lamprey are fair game for them. The data are very clear that it took the introduction of the sea lamprey to cause a very precipitous decline in the fishery. Fishermen were no longer catching what they used to. They dropped from millions of pounds to just thousands of pounds of catch.
From a species perspective, lake trout were nearly extirpated from the Great Lakes, meaning that there were only a few remnant populations that survived the sea lamprey attack. Within the scale of the Great Lakes, they were nearly gone. In their indigenous environment, sea lampreys in the North Atlantic coexisted with the fishes there and the creatures there for many years. And therefore, they were a true parasite. They attached to their host, they withdrew some blood, and the host survived. When lampreys got into the Great Lakes, they were mismatched in size. A lamprey can be upwards of 20 to 25 inches, and it's attaching to a lake trout or a salmon that is only 20 to 30 inches. So in the Great Lakes, the sea lamprey became a predator. The host couldn't sustain that amount of blood draw, and lampreys end up killing their host, and they can kill multiple fish and perhaps even up to 40 pounds of fish overall from the time they enter the lakes to when they leave. And that's the distinction between a parasite that lets its host live and a predator that ends up killing its host.
What really makes the sea lamprey a successful predator is their mouth. We start with the very powerful suction that they can attach to a fish with. You would not be able to pull a lamprey off of a fish with your bare hands. Add to that all of those teeth in that mouth. They serve more like Velcro. They look very intimidating, but they serve more like a Velcro piece so that the lamprey doesn't slide around on the side of the fish. And then the real damaging piece of a sea lamprey attack is that tongue that's in the middle of the mouth. It acts like a drill. It easily works its way through scales, through skin, and into the flesh of the fish so that the lamprey can get the blood meal that it's looking for. The time it takes for the fish to actually succumb to the sea lamprey wound is a bit variable. If it's a large fish, it can certainly last longer than a smaller fish. But the end result is usually the lamprey kills the fish.
Clearly, they're deadly to individual fish, but what makes them so incredibly deadly to the entire Great Lakes ecosystem is their highly successful reproduction.
When the sea lamprey, in the abundance that they're in the Great Lakes, attack large fish in a more population-sized sense, first of all, they remove the top predators, which causes a cascade effect through the ecosystem, basically upsets the ecosystem and creates havoc in that realm. There's over 5,500 tributaries to the Great Lakes. About 10% of them are infested with sea lampreys. For a lamprey to find the right stream to spawn in, they're very curious. They investigate a lot of areas. They're very good at swimming. They have a very acute sense of smell. Find areas where even native lampreys in the Great Lakes have successfully reproduced, and they say, aha, here's a place where I can go, build a nest, and have successful reproduction. So their Latin name, genus and species, is Petromyzon marinus. Petromyzon means stone sucker, and marinus is of the sea. So it is a stone sucker of the sea. And the stone sucker piece really does apply to their life cycle. What happens typically first is the male enters the river, will find a suitable nesting site, and then will begin latching onto these rocks and picking them up and moving them into this very characteristic horseshoe-shaped nest. Once the male and female are in the nest, the female attaches to a stone, and the male will come and attach to the back of the female's head and simultaneously release gametes, eggs and sperm, to fill the nest with eggs. Sea lampreys are very prolific, female holding up to 100,000 eggs. The nest is designed to help create a good, safe survival space for those eggs. And then about 6 to 8 weeks later, the eggs will actually have been growing the whole time, and a little larva, a little sea lamprey will pop out that's only about 9 millimeters long. Those sea lamprey come up into the water column. They don't swim very well. They get washed downstream to typically nice, slow-moving depositional areas.
It's a silty, sandy substrate that's soft. They can bury themselves in it, and then they can poke their heads up every now and then, and they filter feed on detritus that's in the river. They definitely hide in the mud. One reason they can do that is to prevent themselves from being preyed upon by fish. We know during treatments that when they come out and expose themselves in the water, that fish and birds and everything loves to prey on them. So it's definitely a good defense mechanism against predation. They'll bury themselves in that larval habitat for 3 to 5 years, depending on the location. Perhaps one of the most interesting things is how they go from a herbivore living in the stream, feeding on detritus and algae, to a carnivore that lives in the lake and feeds on fish.
They undergo this absolutely amazing physical metamorphosis. During this last 6 to 8 months of their existence in the streams, the mouth forms into that round, very powerful suction disc. The teeth come to the surface, the eyes come to the surface, and they change their digestive system from filter feeding on organic material to being able to go feed on fish and drink blood.
And after about 1.5 years out parasitizing fish in the Great Lakes, they will come back upriver and start that life cycle all over again.
Historically, it destroyed the entire Great Lakes fishery, and that's not just one country's problem, that's a problem for both. So it's a group effort between the Canadian and American governments to control the sea lamprey.
In 1954, both Canada and the United States decided that they needed to step in and try to do something in a binational perspective to try to unite fisheries management in the Great Lakes, and in particular, control the sea lamprey. And that established the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to develop a program of sea lamprey control and to deploy it, and aiming to unite the fish management agencies with common purpose and make important management decisions that harmonized fish management in the Great Lakes.
So, if the sea lamprey spawning in rivers and streams is what makes them so successful as an invasive species,
That's what they needed to attack.
So there were 3 things that were very important in our ability to control sea lampreys the way we do today. The first one was a full understanding of their life cycle. We knew that once lampreys were in the lake, there was very little we could do about them, so we needed to target them at the stream level.
The reasons we go after them in the larval stage is because they are contained in the sediment, and we can use chemical in a stream environment where we couldn't do that in a lake environment due to the amount of water. So catching them in the larval phase in the stream sediment before they make that migration out to the lake where they would be doing damage is critical to sea lamprey control.
The second piece that we needed was a way to do that. Scientists at Hammond Bay Biological Station did tests on over 6,000 chemicals until they found one that was very selective for sea lamprey.
The lampricide we treat with is known as TFM. The technical name for it is 3-trifluoromethyl-4-nitrophenol, but that's a mouthful. Who wants to say that? We simply refer to it as TFM.
It's a very selective compound for lampreys, and what it does is it takes advantage of the very primitive physiology that a lamprey has. When lampreys are exposed to TFM at the right concentration and for the right duration, they can't metabolize it as quickly as other fish species can. And essentially, their ability to breathe at the cellular level gets shut down. Other fish with a more advanced physiology can actually metabolize TFM, and they simply excrete it. So that's how TFM works. The third thing that we needed to know was how many streams do we actually have to target? And through the early 1950s, the US and Canada, the Fish and Wildlife Service and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, surveyed all of the tributaries to the Great Lake, all 5,500 of them. And they found that about 10% were infested. So we knew where they were, we knew how long we had to get to them, and we knew what to use to kill the larvae in the rivers. It was a great three-piece puzzle that was solved in the 1950s that allow us to have the program we have today.
Discovering the silver bullet to eliminate the predator was a huge win.
But with over 5,800 streams and tributaries in the Great Lakes, where and how did they begin?
Sea lamprey larvae live in the sediments, and you can't see them with your naked eye. You can't really tell that they're there. The electricity we put in at a very low voltage. If there's lamprey larvae in those sediments that we're passing the electrofishing wands over, they get an electrical shock, and it irritates them, and they try to get away. And the way they get away is by swimming up into the water column, and then we can see them. Then we can collect them, figure out which streams need to be treated.
The sea lamprey's life cycle comes into play because they live in the stream as a non-parasitic entity for 3 to 5 years. So we don't have to treat every stream every year. We can come back every 3 to 5 years, treat the stream, and get rid of the lamprey before they transform into a parasitic adult. So if you think about it, we will get 2 to 3 generations with one treatment. So we treat a large system like the Manistique River all the way from the mouth, all the way up to these tiny small tributaries in the upper reaches. So for example, in the upper reaches, we use a small peristaltic pump to apply the lampricide to the smaller streams. As we move downstream and the streams get bigger and larger, we use a larger pump setup with a spreader hose right across the river to make sure that we get a homogeneous mix of chemical.
So this river is a lot like the veins in your body. You've got different arteries, different veins coming in. Same thing with the stream, you've got different tributaries. So when we treat the main river, the main stream, there's various spots that these lamprey can escape to and seek refuge from the chemical. And so what we do with these smaller treatments is we try and eliminate those areas of refuge and escaping the treatment. Because what they'll like to do is they'll find fresh water, they'll wait there until the chemicals pass, they go back out in the mainstream and carry on like nothing happened, essentially. In some of the little tributaries coming in, we use what are called TFM bars, which is essentially a solid form of TFM that dissolves over time, typically around 9 hours.
We are way up into the headwaters of the system, so there are numerous tributary complexes that are also infested with larval sea lampreys. So we start applying the lampricide up into the headwaters of streams in which they're infested, and we bring all those different blocks of lampricide together, and that's where we start the mainstream treatment. So when you have well over 100 miles of stream that are infested with sea lamprey, the population, dependent on the habitat, can be up over 1 million larval sea lamprey. And the reason we treat them on a 3 or 4 year cycle is because we are targeting the greatest number of year classes, the greatest population. So essentially you're getting the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to conducting a stream treatment.
So the reason that we have this trailer here and all of our analysis equipment inside is to monitor our chemical levels. So every half hour here, we have been monitoring our levels to make sure that they are where they need to be, where we would like them to be within our safe bounds. And we're also making adjustments as we see fit.
With 5,800 streams and tributaries emptying into the Great Lakes, The St. Mary's River is just so unique. The habitat is great for spawning, the habitat is great for larvae. It's just so much water and moving water, so it's something we just can't tackle with traditional TFM methods. So we needed to think outside the box with this one.
Along with TFM, we also have this very effective lampricide called balicide. And on the St. Mary's River, we use that in a granular formulation. It's wrapped in a piece of sand and coated in a little water-soluble coating. And then we spread that over the surface of the water. It sinks to the bottom to where the lamprey larvae are and does the same thing that TFM does, but just in discrete areas on the river where we know that the highest densities of lampreys are. We've changed the St. Mary's River larval population from being the most productive among all of the Great Lakes to down to less than most large tributaries to the Great Lakes.
The other pinch point in the sea lamprey life cycle in the Great Lakes Basin is when adult lampreys return to tributaries to spawn. In certain systems, barriers, often paired with traps, are used to prevent their upstream migration. The use of barriers minimizes the number of stream miles that sea lampreys can infest and are critical in certain systems that may be difficult to reach or treat with lampricides. The Sea Lamprey Control Program has built approximately 70 barriers throughout the basin and relies on hundreds of other structures that were constructed for other purposes, such as hydropower.
We use barriers in the program as an actual control tool. Other than lampricide treatments, it is the most effective way of controlling sea lampreys in tributaries. So we see barriers as kind of a necessary evil. Yes, they interrupt connectivity in a stream, but they also prevent spawning phase sea lamprey from migrating upstream to additional spawning habitat. So if we can cut off a mile, 2 miles, 10 miles, 50 miles of that habitat, that is that much less stream that we would have to treat with lampricide control. In an ideal situation, you would place a barrier low enough in a stream to block off any suitable habitat located upstream. Now, there are a lot of barriers located throughout the Great Lakes that we did not place and were not there for sea lamprey control purposes, but they do work for us in that they block that passage upstream.
While the battle to control lamprey may never be completely won,
there are different measures of success.
If you think about the enormity of the Great Lakes system, it's huge and overwhelming in many cases. And if someone were to look at that and say, this area is infested with lamprey and we can control them, most people would think that's not possible. But it is. We've got the right recipe. We know how to kill and control sea lamprey. And it was a complete success story from the standpoint of two countries getting together and controlling something and taking care of something that was almost like insurmountable. It took a whole continent, in this case, to make it work right. The fishery is here. You know, we have a viable sport, commercial, tribal fishery for people to enjoy, and it's a direct product of the work that both countries have done to get to that point.
Even though we know we can't kill every single sea lamprey in all of the rivers that they infest with our current methods, we do have the ability to suppress sea lamprey populations by 90%. We consider those our victories right now. Even though we use the latest technologies based on well-founded science, chemistry, physics, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission funds a very sound science program, and we're investigating the use of things like pheromones and repellents to direct lamprey behavior in streams. We're looking at ways to genetically affect lampreys' successful reproduction or ability maybe to metamorphose, things that we have not been able to do a decade ago even.
In supplemental controls, our focus is on stopping the reproduction altogether. Some of those tools are enhanced traps that remove lampreys directly from streams, and other techniques use physical guidance cues like electricity, light, or sound to improve the trapping and removal of adult lampreys. And we're focusing on streams where our traditional lampricide controls are most difficult to use and least effective, so that if we're successful with supplementing control, we see a net reduction in sea lampreys that are going to the lake and fewer fish being killed by lampreys. When it comes to an ecosystem that's as big as the Great Lakes and a predator that's as devastating as the sea lamprey, we don't have the freedom to back down. If we back down, we lose control. It would take a lot more resources to regain it. And it's very risky to assume what's worked in the past will work forever.
Fortunately, sea lamprey are under control in the Great Lakes.
For now, at least.
But because of what they've done and what they can do,
We must never forget that those predators still lurk out there in paradise.